She was the most dangerous person in that family. They just didn't know it yet. Someone in that room made a mistake they didn't even realize. Not loud, not obvious, but the kind that changes everything. She heard it, understood it, and said nothing. And by the time they figured it out, it was already too late.
This is a story about a woman who walked into one of the most powerful families in Texas with nothing to prove and everything to lose. They had power, they had money, they had legacy and a plan, but she wasn't part of it. But what they didn't understand is that the quietest person in the room is often the most dangerous person. This is Talia's story.
The first time they locked the dining room door, Talia was still inside. She stood there in silence, holding a crystal water glass, while laughter drifted from the terrace and her name was spoken like a mistake nobody wanted to claim. By the end of that summer, the same people who shut her out would not make a single move without asking, "Where is Talia?" Talia had not grown up poor, but she had grown up careful. Her mother was a nurse in Houston. Her father owned a small trucking company that survived because he woke before sunrise and trusted no one to work harder than he did. Their house was neat, the bills were paid, and every new thing they owned came with a story about sacrifice. Talia learned early that money was not magic. Money was pressure with perfume on it. She carried that truth into every room. When she met Paul, she was 29, sharp, calm, and used to people underestimating quiet women. She handled private client accounts for a luxury property firm in Dallas, the kind of job that taught her how rich people smiled while hiding fear. Paul came in with a loose tie, tired eyes, and the kind of last name that made receptionists stand straighter. Paul Bennett. The Bennetts were one of those families people in Texas talked about as if they were half business, half legend. Real estate, hotels, private equity, a foundation with their name on a museum wing, pictures in magazines, black SUVs outside every event. Old Southern money polished with modern ambition. They had homes in Highland Park, Aspen, Miami, and Martha's Vineyard. They had rules. Paul did not act like them at first. He asked Talia simple questions. He listened to the answers. He remembered details. When she mentioned her mother's knee surgery, he asked about recovery a week later. When she said she hated loud restaurants, he changed their dinner reservation without making a show of it. That was what pulled her in. 3 months later, he told her the truth. "My family already has someone in mind for me," he said over coffee one Sunday morning. "Kamari." Talia looked at him. "Your girlfriend?" "My ex," he corrected. "Depending on who in my family is telling the story, she's either my future or my biggest regret." He said Kamari came from the same world. Her father managed a hedge fund. Her mother chaired charity galas. She and Paul had dated on and off for years, mostly because every breakup was treated like a temporary weather issue by both families. They vacationed together, invested together, planned around each other. To them, love was a nice detail. Alignment was everything. "And you?" Talia asked. "I'm with you." It sounded simple. It was not. The first Bennett event Talia attended was a birthday dinner for Paul's father, Richard, at the family estate outside Dallas. The house sat behind iron gates and trimmed hedges, with a long drive curving around a fountain. Inside, the place smelled like polished wood, lemon wax, and old decisions. A staff member took her coat without meeting her eyes. Paul squeezed her hand. "Just stay close." She was not scared of chandeliers or marble floors. She was scared of people who smiled with their mouths and measured you with their silence. Richard Bennett did not bother to hide his disappointment. He shook Talia's hand like he was testing an object before returning it. Paul's mother, Evelyn, was softer on the surface but colder underneath. She smiled and said, "We've heard so much about you," in a tone that suggested the opposite. Paul's younger sister, Simone, gave Talia a quick hug, then spent the next hour staring at her dress like it had interrupted the evening. Then Kamari arrived. She entered late enough to be noticed and warm enough to seem innocent. Tall, perfect posture, skin glowing, diamonds like tiny stage lights. She kissed Evelyn on both cheeks, touched Richard's shoulder, laughed with Simone, and greeted Paul with the confidence of someone who had never once been uncertain of her place. When she turned to Talia, her smile was flawless. "So you're Talia," she said. "Talia," Talia answered. Kamari tilted her head. "I've heard your name a lot lately." There were 10 ways to answer that. Talia chose the simplest. "I hope it was spelled right." Paul almost choked on his drink. Kamari smiled wider, but her eyes changed. Just enough. Dinner began badly and worsened with precision. The seating chart placed Talia at the far end of the table between Richard's attorney and Simone's husband, who spent most of the meal checking market news under the tablecloth. Paul sat closer to his parents. Kamari sat across from him. Every story from Evelyn somehow involved Kamari. Every family memory included her. Every joke landed in a circle that closed before reaching Talia. At one point, Richard raised his glass and said, "To people who understand legacy." His eyes rested on Paul, then Kamari, then somewhere past Talia's shoulder. Later, when Talia stepped into the hallway to take a call from her mother, she returned to find the dining room doors shut, not slammed. Shut. Deliberate. Voices floated from the terrace where dessert had apparently moved without her. She stood there for 2 full seconds, phone still in hand. A server passing by froze. "I'm so sorry." Talia put on a calm face. "It's fine. Please open it." The server did, but by then everyone had settled outside beneath string lights and heat lamps, and the pause in conversation when she stepped out was so clean it felt rehearsed. Evelyn blinked. "Oh, we thought you had left." Talia sat down slowly. "Not yet." Paul looked angry then, but he said nothing until the drive home. "I'm sorry," he said, hands tight on the steering wheel. "That was wrong." Talia stared out at the dark highway. "That wasn't confusion, Paul." "I know. Do you?" He kept driving. That was the beginning. Most women in Talia's position would have walked away, and some nights she thought that would have been the smart thing. But Talia was not staying because she wanted the Bennetts to clap for her. She stayed because she loved Paul, and because some part of her refused to let cruel people decide the value of her presence. Still, the family made the next year hard. They invited Paul to dinners and told him Talia was welcome, then changed the venue at the last minute and forgot to send her the update. They mailed holiday gifts addressed to Paul and guests. At charity events, Evelyn introduced Talia as someone Paul is seeing, even after the engagement ring. Richard once asked Talia whether her parents felt intimidated visiting this level of living. Simone acted friendly only when she wanted gossip. Kamari stayed near the family like perfume on expensive fabric. Never too close, never too far. Paul pushed back in his own way. He skipped dinners. He argued with Richard. He moved out of the family's downtown penthouse and bought a place with Talia. He proposed on a quiet weekend in Santa Fe with no cameras, no speeches, no family approval. Talia said yes because she knew his love was real. But real love does not erase weak courage. Whenever the Bennetts turned icy in public, Paul got tense, then silent. He confronted them in private, apologized in the car, and hoped that would be enough. Talia began to understand something painful. He loved her, but part of him still moved like a son asking permission. The wedding was elegant, expensive, and full of smiles that did not reach certain eyes. 2 months after the honeymoon, Richard suffered a mild stroke during a board breakfast in Chicago. He survived. The headlines were controlled. The family office released a short statement. Evelyn flew out on the private jet. Paul went straight from Dallas. Simone posted a quote about gratitude and resilience. Talia packed a bag and went with Paul because no one told her not to. At Northwestern Memorial, the Bennett family moved like a machine under stress. Lawyers, assistants, doctors, drivers, security. Everyone had a role except Talia, which suited Evelyn just fine. She left Talia out of briefings. She assigned rooms without asking whether Talia needed one. At one point, she handed Talia her handbag and said, "Can you hold this while I speak to neurology?" Talia took the bag. Then she handed it to an assistant and walked toward the nurse's station. For the next 48 hours, she did what no one else thought to do. She learned the names of every nurse on Richard's floor. She kept track of medications, follow-up scans, meal restrictions, and visiting windows. She called Paul's assistant to arrange clean clothes. She noticed Evelyn had not eaten and got her tea without announcing it. She sat with Paul at 3 a.m. when he looked 10 years younger and much more alone. Nobody thanked her. But when Richard was discharged to recover at the family estate, it was Talia who noticed the medication list from Chicago did not match the home nurse's schedule. It was Talia who caught the mistake before Richard took a double dose of blood thinner. The home nurse went pale. Paul went colder. Evelyn said very quietly, "Good catch." It was the first honest thing she had said to Talia. Richard recovered enough to return home, but he was weaker, and weakness changed the air around the Bennetts. It exposed cracks. The company had always looked invincible from the outside, but Talia began to see the strain underneath. One hotel deal in Miami had stalled. A lawsuit involving a construction partner was circling. Cash was tied up. Richard was still making decisions but more slowly, and Paul was carrying more than anyone admitted. Simone's husband wanted a bigger role in the family office. Evelyn wanted control of appearances, and Kamari had quietly returned to regular dinners and Sunday lunches like ivy creeping back over a wall. One rainy Thursday, Talia came home to find Paul in the dark, jacket off, tie loosened, a whiskey glass untouched beside him. "What happened?" she asked. He took too long to answer. "My father amended the trust." Talia sat down. "He shifted voting power if he becomes incapacitated. Not to me alone, to a committee." Paul laughed once bitterly. "My mother Simone, 2 outside advisors, and Richard suggested adding someone with social and strategic alignment." Talia looked at him. "Kamari." He said nothing. "That's insane." "He says she understands the family." Talia's chest went tight, but her voice stayed level. "And what do you understand?" Paul rubbed his face. "That he doesn't trust me." That was the real wound. A week later, the family held a strategy dinner at the estate. Talia was included only because Paul insisted. She expected the usual tension. She did not expect to hear her future discussed as if she were temporary. The meeting took place in Richard's library after dinner. Talia brought in coffee because the staff had been sent home early. Nobody thanked her for that either. As she set down a tray, Richard said, "This is exactly the problem, Paul. You are building a life around someone who does not strengthen the structure." Evelyn sighed but did not stop him. Kamari sat near the window, still as sculpture. Paul stood. "Enough." Richard kept going. "Marriage is not just emotion, it is judgment, timing, positioning." Talia placed the last cup on the table. Her hand was steady. Then Richard said the sentence she would never forget. "She is pleasant, yes, but she is not one of us, and she never will be." Silence. No one looked at her. That was the night something inside Talia went still. She walked out of the library, down the hall, past the portraits and polished silver, and into the guest room she had used twice in 2 years. She closed the door and sat on the edge of the bed without crying. She had spent so much energy enduring the Bennetts that she had almost missed the truth. They did not want her approval. They wanted her submission. That changed everything. When Paul came in 20 minutes later, she was already packing. "I'm sorry," he said. "I should have stopped him sooner." "Yes," she said. He flinched. She zipped the bag. "I am going home." "We'll leave now." "No, I am going home. You decide when you are ready to join me." "Talia." She looked at him then, fully. "I love you. But I will not keep standing in rooms where people erase me while you manage the temperature. I am done asking your family to see me. From now on, I decide how close I stand to their fire." He had no answer. For 3 days, Talia did not call the Bennetts. She went to work. She visited her mother. She slept. She thought. When Paul came home the second night, exhausted and ashamed, she let him in, but she did not soften the truth. "You keep hoping one brave conversation will fix this," she told him. "It won't. Your family does not need explanation. They need boundaries." He sat across from her, quiet. "Can you do that?" she asked. "I don't know." "Then learn." The shift began small and almost invisible. Talia stopped attending events where she was not directly respected. If Evelyn called with a sweet voice and vague invitation, Talia asked clear questions. Who will be there? What is the purpose? How long? If the answer smelled like humiliation, she declined. She stopped chasing warmth. She stopped volunteering emotional labor where it would be treated as a servant's instinct instead of a partner's strength. And strangely, that was when the Bennetts began to feel her absence. Richard's recovery stayed uneven. Evelyn's stress made her sharp with staff. Simone floated in and out, distracted by social commitments. Paul was buried in negotiations and internal politics. The household still ran, but badly. Missed calls, duplicate bookings, confused medication updates, vendors unpaid because approvals sat in the wrong inbox. Everyone assumed someone else had it handled. That was when Evelyn called Talia herself. Her voice was thin. Richard's physical therapist says he missed 2 sessions. Paul is in New York. I was told you had the discharge binder. Do you? Talia did. I can send it, Talia said. A pause. Could you explain the schedule? Talia could hear the cost of the request. She drove over that evening. No one greeted her at the door. The house was loud with tension. Richard was angry in the den because a conference call had gone badly. Simone was on speakerphone arguing with someone about a fundraiser. Evelyn stood in the kitchen with 2 phones, a stack of papers, and the face of a woman who had never expected her life to become this messy. Talia took one look and understood. This family had money. What they did not have was a center. She did not rush to comfort anyone. She asked for all medical paperwork, all staff schedules, and 1 quiet hour at the kitchen table. She built a clean weekly plan: therapist visits, nurse shifts, medication checks, driver timing, meal restrictions, exercise windows, emergency contacts. She color-coded everything because rich people loved aesthetics even when drowning. When she finished, Evelyn stared at the pages. This is helpful. Talia met her eyes. Good. 2 days later, Paul called from Manhattan. My mother says you saved the house. I made a schedule. You did more than that. Talia said nothing. The next crisis came from the business. A journalist had started asking questions about the Miami project. A contractor who had been quietly settled with months earlier was now talking again. Nothing criminal, but messy enough to damage lenders' confidence if the story spread. Richard wanted to fight. Simone wanted a public statement. Evelyn wanted silence. Paul needed accurate documents, timelines, and proof that the internal numbers matched what had been shared. Late one night, while Paul worked at the estate, Talia came by with food. She found 3 executives arguing over versions of the same report. Numbers had been copied into different decks. Dates did not match. Someone had sent a draft memo to the wrong advisor. Richard was furious. Evelyn was pacing. Paul looked like a man trying to hold a wall up with his shoulders. Talia listened for 15 minutes. Then she asked one question. Who owns the master file? Everyone stopped. No one answered. That told her everything. For the next 6 hours, at Paul's request and under the startled eyes of people who had once barely looked at her, Talia sat at the long conference table and built order out of panic. 1 document owner, 1 approved timeline, 1 communications chain, 1 contact list, no assumptions, no duplicate instructions, no forwarding without tagging responsibility. She had done smaller versions of this in real estate when luxury deals got ugly and egos got louder than facts. By 2 a.m., the room was finally quiet. Richard looked at the clean packet in front of him, then at Talia. Where did you learn to do this? He asked. She closed her laptop. In rooms where mistakes cost money. After that night, the shift could no longer be denied. Staff began checking with Talia because she answered clearly. Paul leaned on her openly. Evelyn started texting questions instead of issuing instructions. Simone, seeing the wind change, became almost embarrassingly polite. Even Richard began listening when she spoke. Kamari noticed too. The confrontation came at a charity auction in October, under white tents and golden lights. Talia had not wanted to attend, but Paul asked, and this time the invitation had come directly from the foundation, with her full name printed beside his. That mattered. She wore a black dress, simple and sharp. Nothing to prove. Kamari approached near the silent auction tables, holding champagne and a smile that looked expensive. "You've become very busy with the family," she said. Talia glanced at a sculpture on the bidding sheet. "Have I?" Kamari lowered her voice. "Just be careful. Families like this only borrow people. They don't really change." Talia turned to face her. "You sound worried." Kamari's smile thinned. "I'm realistic." "No," Talia said softly. "You're waiting." That landed. Kamari took a slow sip. "Paul and I understand each other in ways you probably never will." "Maybe," Talia said. "But understanding a family is not the same as steering one." Kamari's eyes sharpened. "Do you think they love you now?" Talia's answer came easy because she had finally learned the lesson herself. "I don't need that." She walked away before Kamari could recover. By winter, Richard's health had improved, but his authority had changed shape. He was still feared, still respected, still used to control. Yet more and more decisions passed through Paul, and more, Paul did not move without Talia's view. Because she saw what others missed. She knew which advisor was leaking anxiety to lenders. She knew Evelyn was covering tension with shopping and overbooking. She knew Simone's husband wanted access, not responsibility. She knew which staff members were loyal and which only performed loyalty when watched. She knew Richard's temper now came fastest when he was tired. She knew the family's real weakness was not pride. It was disorder, and she knew something else too. Indispensable could become another trap. One evening, after helping Paul prepare for a board meeting, Talia stood in their kitchen and watched him rehearse remarks under his breath. He stopped. "What?" She leaned on the counter. "I need you to hear me clearly. I will help where I choose. I will not become unpaid glue for your family." Paul nodded immediately. "You're right." "No, listen, I mean it. I am not earning a seat by saving them." He crossed the room. "You already have a seat with me." She held his gaze. "Then act like it everywhere." And to his credit, he finally did. At Christmas, the Bennetts hosted their usual grand dinner. Governors, donors, cousins, business partners, polished laughter, impossible floral arrangements, enough silverware to confuse a diplomat. In years past, Talia would have entered like a target disguised as a guest. This time was different. Not because the family had become kind, because Talia had become immovable. When introductions began, Evelyn took the microphone to welcome everyone. Her voice carried through the ballroom. She thanked sponsors. She thanked old friends. She thanked her husband and children. Then she paused. "And I also want to thank my daughter-in-law, Talia Bennett, whose steadiness has meant more to this family than she knows." The room applauded. Talia felt Paul's hand tighten around hers. Across the room, Kamari stood perfectly still. Later that night, after guests left and staff cleared the last glasses, Richard asked Talia to step into the library. The same library where he had once said she would never be one of them. He stood by the fire, cane in one hand, the orange light catching the new fragility in his face. "I was hard on you," he said. Talia said nothing. He looked at the flames. Part of that was arrogance. Part of it was fear. "Of me?" "Of change," he answered. "Of losing control, of seeing my son choose something I did not build." She let that sit. He turned toward her. "You did not ask this family for permission. You simply became necessary." Talia's voice was calm. "Necessary is not the same as valued." Richard gave one slow nod. "No, it isn't." Then he said, "Still, I was wrong." That was as close to apology as a man like Richard Bennett could get. Talia accepted it for what it was and nothing more. When she left the library, she found Evelyn waiting in the hall. Her eyes were glossy with fatigue. "He spoke to you?" Evelyn asked. "Yes." Evelyn folded her hands. "I know we made things difficult." "That is a gentle way to say it." A sad smile touched Evelyn's mouth. "Maybe I thought if I held the old shape of our family long enough, it would survive. And did it? Evelyn glanced toward the ballroom, now half dark. No. Talia should have felt triumphant. Instead, she felt clear. That was better. Months later, when Richard formally shifted more authority to Paul and trimmed the committee structure, Kamari disappeared from the family orbit almost overnight. No argument, no scene, just fewer calls, fewer invitations, fewer strategic sightings. She had always been close to the power, not the people. Once the power moved, she moved too. Simone adapted because Simone adapted to everything that kept her comfortable. Evelyn grew less sharp, though never soft. Richard treated Talia with careful respect, the kind proud men offer only after losing the right to do less. Paul changed the most. Love finally grew a spine. And Talia? She never forgot the locked dining room door. She never forgot the terrace laughter. She never forgot standing in a mansion full of wealth and realizing dignity was the only thing she truly owned in that moment. That memory kept her honest. The family began inviting her into every discussion. Estate matters, foundation plans, health decisions, guest lists, expansion ideas. But Talia chose her places carefully. She joined what mattered. She refused what drained her. She built influence without becoming consumed by the machine. That was the part the Bennetts never saw coming. They thought belonging meant being accepted. Talia learned belonging meant being anchored. They thought power came from family name, old money, shared circles, and approval passed down like jewelry. But the strongest power in that house came from the woman they had treated like a stranger, the woman who stopped asking to be loved and started deciding where her strength would go. In the end, Talia did become indispensable, not because she bent, not because she performed, not because they finally invited her all the way in. She became indispensable because she understood something they had spent their whole rich, polished lives missing. Approval can be withheld. Influence cannot be ignored.
Talia never asked to be loved by that family. She just refused to be erased by them. Because respect isn't given because of your name, and it's not taken by force. It's built quietly. And in the end, that was the only move that mattered. If this story hit differently, drop a comment below and let me know. And follow because the next one is coming.